be talking about the WeObserve project, which is drawing to a close this year. And we're going to be talking about everything that they've discovered and found out during the last 3 years of operations. And with that, I'll hand over to Gerid, who's going to introduce us today.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Welcome everyone. My name is Gerid Hager. I'm from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and I'm going to start the webinar on behalf of the WeObserve consortium. I'm leading the project out of IIASA in Austria. And yeah, as Tim said, we are basically coming to the end of the official Horizon 2020 funding period of the project. It's ending this week, so end of March. And we thought this is a really good time to share some of the lessons and insights from the WeObserve project. So I'm gonna kick it off and just give a brief overview of WeObserve. So WeObserve in a nutshell. So we're all on the same page of what the project is about and what the follow-up presentations are all about. So WeObserve is an Horizon 2020 coordination and support action. It ran between, or it is still running. It started in 2016, end of 2016, and coming to an end this March 2021. We have 7 partners in the consortium, and we all came together with a vision and mission around citizen observatory. So integrating citizen observatory into environmental management, into the empowerment of communities, and to really try to move citizen science into the mainstream and building sustainable citizen observatories and related activities. So most of the partners in the consortium have been part of previous citizen observatory projects from Horizon 2020, namely CENT, the GROW Observatory, Ground Truth 2.0, and LandSense. And we also have a partner in the consortium, the Alto Adriatico Water Authority, that are still running a citizen observatory for flood risk management in northern Italy. And that actually came out of an FP7 project, namely We Sense It. So we came together to form the consortium, and also ECSA was one of our partners. And we really wanted to look at citizen observatories. So just to recap, what are citizen observatories? They have over the last decade evolved as a particular, also particularly integrated form of citizen science, focusing initially on environmental monitoring, management and governance. Also Earth observation was a big topic. It revolves around place-based participation of citizens, but it doesn't just have scientific goals, but it really tries to strive for broader societal relevance. And for that, it's required that a large network of stakeholders is involved, including policymakers and authorities. It builds on the use of web and mobile applications, but not just for citizens to gather data, but really to enable a multi-directional flow of data and information and knowledge within that larger ecosystem of stakeholders. They can be longer term or run for a defined time frame, depending on the issues and the situations that are trying to address. And we've also seen a different range of citizen observatory models. So they range from contributee to collegial, collaborative, or co-designed models. So what were the WeObserve objectives for these 3 years? So we really wanted to, as a coordination and support action, develop communities of practice around key topics and key challenges, to assess the citizen observatory knowledge base and to strengthen that knowledge, bringing that knowledge together to be able to tackle future environmental challenges using the science coming out of citizen observatories. Also to just extend the geographical coverage of the knowledge base, to bring it to new communities, spread the ideas, spread the knowledge, and to spur the implementation of best practices and standards. Also to demonstrate the added value of citizen observatories in environmental monitoring, especially with initiatives such as GEOS, Copernicus, and particularly also within the UN SDGs framework. And last but not least, to promote the uptake of information from citizen observatory activities, and to foster new opportunities and innovation processes also with other actors in society, SMEs, businesses, Earth observation providers. So these were the objectives, but we also wanted to look at key challenges around the awareness, acceptability, and sustainability of citizen observatories. And how we did this was really to conduct a lot of activities. So WeObserve, and we're going to dive a bit more deeper into all of them, well, not all of them, some of them, the communities of practice that were created. We also looked deeply into the citizen observatory landscape. We had many events, workshops, roadshows, the WeObserve conference to bring people together. We developed the WeObserve toolkit that brought together tools from citizen observatories. We ran and are still running a WeObserve MOOC, an online course. We conducted 3 citizen science challenges at the Inspire Hackathon last year. We ran an interoperability experiment. Actually, the second part of it is still up and running. Last year, we had an open data challenge. Then this is what we're gonna launch today, the WeObserve cookbook. We also had loads of WeObserve publications, and I'm gonna come back to all of these at the very end of the webinar. Also, we're launching today the WeObserve roadmap, and last but not least, the WeObserve knowledge base, which brings together all of the different resources that WeObserve has created in one place on the WeObserve website. So all this to say, we've done quite a bit, and the webinar today is really to provide more insights and more details on 3 parts of the project. On the one hand, the WeObserve communities of practice. Uta Wehn, Joan Maso, and Dilek Fraisl will talk about that in just a minute. Then Mel Woods from the University of Dundee will talk about accelerating the uptake of citizen observatories and citizen observatories tools, the concepts and the data through different approaches such as MOOCs and open data challenges. And then we'll have Joan Maso and Valantis Tsiakos talking about using interoperability experiments and hackathons to address data-related challenges in citizen observatories. I'll round it up with some key outputs and achievements, and then Margaret Gold will be chairing the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So now handing over to Uta and Joan and Dilek for the first presentation on the WeObserve communities of practice.
Thank you very much, Dilek, and welcome everybody. I'm happy to tell you a bit more about what we did with communities of practice in the WeObserve project and why we did this. It was primarily to strengthen the knowledge base, which was our first objective, as Gerid outlined. But in particular, what we saw was there is a lot of practice-based knowledge about citizen observatories and citizen science more generally available, but it's actually very dispersed amongst practitioners. So we looked to the well-known approach of communities of practice from the field of knowledge management to overcome this dispersion. Now, what are communities of practice? Well, first and foremost, they're made up of people, and in particular, people who share a common problem and concern or a passion, and they see value in collaborating and jointly learning more about this problem and generating outputs from these interactions. So in the WeObserve context, we had the challenges that Gerid has already outlined us earlier, and these are the challenges that the WeObserve communities of practice were set up to address. In particular, we have set up 4 different communities of practice. Each has a different thematic focus and each has a different purpose. So the co-design and engage COP brings together different co-design and engagement practices that have been generated and practiced in different projects. The impact COP tries to bring together knowledge on how we can best capture and demonstrate the impact of citizen science, but also citizen observatories for governance and in particular for policy. The Interop COP uses OGC standards to support data integration in citizen science projects, and this is led by Joan Maso from CREAF. And the SDG COP was set up to demonstrate the value of citizen science data and impact for SDG achievement, and is led by my colleague Dilek Fraisl from IIASA. Now, not only did the communities of practice have a different focus, they also brought together slightly different stakeholders, of course, given their thematic focus. And they had different knowledge or different practices that they developed. So, for example, the Interop COP was very much focused on the interoperability experiment and therefore focused on demonstration, experimentation, whereas the other 3 COPs were more focused on producing knowledge resources. How do we set up the WeObserve communities of practice? Well, we ran through a consistent, coherent co-design approach that started off with an initiation, a call for members, getting the launch events ready. And then we held dedicated co-design workshops for each COP to come up with jointly agreed objectives for each community of practice. We articulated those in draft inception reports, and upon agreement by all the COP members, we then started our activities. So it was very much a bottom-up approach, much like many of our citizen science and citizen observatory activities also are. In terms of membership, by now the COPs have been running for 2.5 years and have grown into rather stable communities of practitioners. Each COP has between 120 and 150 members. Having said that, the number of active members is considerably smaller, ranging between 12, 15 to 20. And we have task forces that are made up in each COP for specific activities. The geographic spread is also pretty good. We have more than 40 countries, not only from Europe, but actually from around the globe, including the US, Australia, Iran, Latin America. And the membership is also diverse, although it is somewhat biased towards members from academia and research organizations. We do have sizable numbers of members also from the public sector and from NGOs. Now, what is it actually that we do? So how do we organize ourselves? So to begin with, we have very regular telcos, but we also have face-to-face forums. About that a little bit more in a moment. As I said, we organize ourselves into dedicated task forces to produce, for example, specific outputs, joint abstracts for conference sessions or papers, or to test specific tools and approaches and to report them back to the larger community of practice. A big part of what we do is also networking in terms of keeping each other up to date, what events are coming up, or even joining forces to set up joint sessions for particular events. And finally, last but certainly not least, is also a big part of the activities are related to actually carrying out the insights that we've generated within each COP and sharing them with the wider communities. For the SDG COP, for example, in particular with national statistical offices, as it's trying to foster the update of citizen science data in SDG monitoring. The UN system, of course, is an important recipient, and the SDG COP activities here have spanned an impressive number of UN-related events over the course of time. Similarly, the Interop COP has engaged very much with geo-standardization bodies such as OGC, the Open Geospatial Consortium. And on the whole, the COPs have been very active in the various citizen science conferences, including the ECSA conference, that have taken place over the last couple of years. The forums are a particular way in which we interact. So we've held 6 forums over the lifetime of the communities of practice, and they're very nice because they give us 2 to 3 days of joint activities where each COP can do a deep dive into particular issues, but we also have very nice interactions across the COPs because there are surprisingly number of common interests across the communities of practice. We sometimes invite local speakers that are external to the COPs, but are based, for example, in Barcelona. We heard from the Mosquito Alert Citizen-Science project. And while we started off these forums as hybrid events to allow participation from further afield around the globe, of course, with COVID, we had to move them entirely online. But nevertheless, we've still had good experience with participation and attendance. Now, what has all this resulted in terms of outputs? So one thing is the glossary that 2 of the communities of practice have set up very early, because they found we need a common vocabulary. We need to have a joint understanding and meaning when we use terms such as engagement, participation, co-design. And this has helped not only the communities of practice themselves. We put this online, it's up there for comment and additions from the wider citizen science community. So it's really also a contribution to the wider citizen science community. We have produced no less than 7 scientific papers, 5 of which have been published already, 2 more are under review, 2 engineering reports, and quite a number of joint conference presentations and sessions. Now, this is all great, but we of course also want to take stock of whether we're doing things well, and whether as COPS chairs, for example, we think we're doing things wonderfully well, but actually our members think differently. So we launched an evaluation which was held amongst all the COP members before Christmas. And we first of all wanted to gauge what their main expectations were in terms of why did they show up, why did they make time to participate in the communities of practice. We see that the networking with relevant practitioners and networking across networks is of strong interest and was a high expectation by literally all COP members, regardless which COP they were from. Now, helping to improve running citizen science projects was more prominent in the Interop COP with its interoperability experiment, whereas the production of joint publications was of more interest and focus of the remaining 3 communities of practice. But the proof is in the pudding. So did we meet the expectations? And from the feedback that we got from the COP members, we can see that the majority indicated indeed that the expectations had been met to a large extent, which is very encouraging. Now, we are often asked, well, how do you do these WeObserve communities of practice? What are the ways of functioning? So it boils down to the question of how to COP. And one particular aspect comes back to what I said at the start in terms of co-designing the communities of practice with distinct objectives but also concrete action plans. We have seen from earlier action groups and working groups that people easily gather around a new initiative such as this, but it will easily fall apart if there isn't sufficient structure in place. So having agreed objectives, but also having a concrete action plan has really helped. Secondly, it's also important to make sure that we can play into the availability that people have. And for most people, this is an additional effort that they have to do on top of existing activities. So it was very important that we created an atmosphere where people can contribute as much as they're able to contribute. So in terms of time, but also in terms of the kinds of content that they contributed to the discussions, that was a safe space. And that they could experiment with different data and services. Overall, it also very much comes down to practicing what we preach in citizen science and citizen observatories more generally in terms of balancing diverse incentives. For some people, it was very important that we stick to the plan, that we achieve it. On the other hand, to really make time for the regular telcos that happen mostly on a monthly level is also important to make sure that there's fresh content, there is input So guest speakers provided a very good means to deliver that fresh input to the discussions. The consolidation of knowledge, as I mentioned, producing concrete outputs. So people at the end of the day can tangibly see what their participation in the COP has resulted in. I will not go through the types of content we've produced, but to make sure that you do deliver and produce tangibles has proven important. Joint networking events and preparation of such events, the reaching out to networking into the relevant communities, and last but certainly not least, resources such as the WeObserve project has provided for the communities of practice are very important. The workload is of course somewhat unbalanced against the chairs for whom this is quite an intense effort. And so funding needs to be available for that, but also funding for the COPS forums. We have sponsored participation by COP members who were not part of the consortium. So it's enabled them to participate in those face-to-face meetings. And it's also allowed us to purchase services such as a recent workshop on storytelling that we held during the most recent COPS forum. So finances are also important. Now, as we move on towards the sustainability beyond the lifetime of the WeObserve project, not planning is of course planning to fail. And our sustainability strategy was firmly based on the philosophy of communities of practice, if you like, from the field of knowledge management. And that is that they should exist only for as long as they provide value for their members. There is no point in extending them if there's no interest. So as part of the evaluation, but also as part of discussions that we held in the dedicated telcos and in the recent forum, we gauged and confirmed the interest from our COPS members that indeed they're interested to pursue this activity beyond the lifetime of the WeObserve project, which is really nice. And in order to make sure that we can do that, we have explored various links that we have with relevant umbrella initiatives. For example, the Interop COP has already found a new home, if you like, by the Horizon 2020 Cost for Clouds project, which will absorb it. And we have looked at the GEO Group on Earth observation as a new home, perhaps for some of the COPs, the Citizen-Science Global Partnership. These are all relevant initiatives that we are exploring, and we're looking at perhaps joining forces. And of course, also ECSA is perhaps a home or a merger for some of the working groups. But more concretely, what we have also pursued is we have included the COPs and the financing and sustainability of the COPs as concrete measures in some of the most recent proposals that we have submitted. There's one that was dedicated as a cost action, which might provide funding in particular for SDG COP, and a Green Deal proposal that might provide funding certainly for the co-design and impact COP, if not some of the others. So we have some irons in the fire, if you like, and various options now that we have confirmed interest to continue. And overall, the outputs that the COPs have produced, we're in discussion, of course, also with the EU-Citizen.Science project to pursue links. There are links there to make sure that these outputs are available online in the long run. So coming to a close with some key messages, as I said, we need to practice what we preach. This is what we've really learned. We need to set up the communities of practice as a mechanism for bringing together knowledge in the citizen science field just as carefully, and run them just as carefully as we do with our citizen science projects and citizen observatories more generally. Secondly, there is a lot of interest in the WeObserve approach to COPs, and we are codifying this approach, if you like, making a paper available, dedicating effort to actually writing up how we've done this, what we've learned. So this is easily available also to others. There's interest, for example, from the Australian Citizen Science Association to practice this in Australia as a means to bringing together the citizen science community there. And we have already applied it outside the WeObserve project under the umbrella of the Citizen Science Global Partnership for what we call a sister COP, the Citizen Science Open Science Community of Practice that we've set up in response to the UNESCO recommendation on open science and the consultations that are going on in that respect. And finally, now that the WeObserve COPs are well established, they've become a reference point for the UN system, for the scientific community, for citizen science practitioners, and we're here to stay. You're very warmly invited to join one or more of the communities of practice. How to join them is available on the WeObserve website. And with that, I'd like to close. Thank you all for your attention, and back to you, Gerid.
Thanks a lot, Uta. If you have questions for me, for Uta, for the speakers that are coming up, please just post them in the chat. Tim and Margaret will collect them, and then we'll be able to feed them in the final Q&A session. So we're not doing Q&As in between the presentations. We're just going to finish the presentations in one go, and then at the end we'll look at your questions. So I'm handing over to Mel, who from the University of Dundee, Mel Woods, who's going to talk about MOOCs and open data challenges as a mechanism to accelerate the uptake of citizen observatories and citizen observatory knowledge.
Okay, so thanks so much. Let's see. Okay, thank you, Gerid. I'm hoping you can see the full screen there. So my name is Mel Woods, Professor Mel Woods. I'm here to represent the team at the University of Dundee of myself, Dr. Saskia Coulson, Raquel Hatjes, and Andy Cobley. And I'm going to talk to you today about how we've accelerated the uptake of citizen observatories through our work on massive open online courses, or MOOCs, which I'll refer to them from now, and the substantiation of an online global open data challenge to uptake the open resources and data that come out of citizen observatories. So really we were using these two mechanisms as well as the opening up of tools to stimulate and extend the value of the citizen observatory and the work that we've all done recently, and we often see also through citizen science projects, really to spread and scale best practices, tools and resources, and to release licensed open data sets from the work that we've done. We had an additional aim within the Open Data Challenge to do that for social good. And in doing so, we scoped the real world environmental challenges that were relevant to some of the data sets that came out of our observatories. And I'll talk a little bit about that next. So in order to kick off a MOOC, how do you do that? Well, they take a lot of work is all I can say to start. Generally, you need about 12 months in all to develop a MOOC. It can be done more quickly. But we started to look at a survey in order to find out what our community, those involved in citizen observatories and interested in them specifically, what they really needed to support with in order to start to generate their own projects. So unsurprisingly, we had a few survey findings. As we all know, keeping motivated in a project can be an issue and remains as an issue. Understanding how to use the data collected, which was quite interesting, knowing how to communicate the data and discovering ways to develop a project. I think we're all quite familiar with these, as well as understanding protocols and understanding how to use the technology. People are still experiencing problems with this respect. Added were some really interesting developments, and I think it's these that we've started to build on within WeObserve and communicating that. So getting data back from the project. So participants reported difficulty in getting primarily raw data back from the project in order to do things with it themselves, not understanding this bigger picture, so the wider ecosystem within which the project exists, or indeed the kind of global relevance of the local challenges, and then the accessibility of the technology itself. At the same time, we did a survey on tools. So we're very interested in tools at the University of Dundee, and we've got a bit of a track record in opening up and designing tools for others to use. And so we wanted to know actually which tools would enable people to overcome some of these issues. And this has fed into subsequent work on the WeObserve Knowledge Hub that you can access. So what we found out was that open source software or soft tools that have less strict licensing agreements allow others to use and adapt this material, that they're downloadable, that the ability or the potential ability to download these assets can assist people in using the tool, and that participatory methods enabling people to play an active and influential role in decision making was incredibly important for people. So we created the Citizen-Science project, How to Make a Difference, as a consortium. All of the members of the consortium happily participated, as well as the COPs who helped to develop the framework or the pedagogy by which we delivered. And I'm just going to show you, because I think it's quite relevant, a little bit of our trailer halfway through for this MOOC, because it provided a really important call to action. And I'll play this for you just now.
I do. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? What can we do?
So this messaging, this call to action really underpinned the type of participant that we wanted to attract to the MOOC. And you can see here that we ran 2 iterations on the left-hand side. And these are the sorts of numbers of people that we started to attract. So enrollments up to well over 1,000, and we're well over 2,000 now enrollments. The visits to the site and the interactions with some of the materials began to generate a really nice interest and an interest in the actual content. And here you can see out of the participation, the sorts of age ranges. Interestingly, the majority of the age range was between 26 and 45 to 55, which somewhat goes against the types of interactions and age ranges that you might see in a typical citizen science project. Many people were working full-time, some were working part-time. And so we were reaching a different sort of demographic and different kinds of people. And we had some great testimonials. So just people saying this is just amazing. They've shared all of the links. They're going to start to bring the data and the projects and the tools into their learning and try things out. I'm going to quickly move on to our Open Data Challenge, which was another way of accelerating participation in citizen observatories in the release and the license of data. So as Gerid and others have said, we moved very much to an online space in order to achieve this, to promote and uptake the use of open data sets, to show the individual and combined potential of CO data, and to produce innovative applications out of the back that are relevant to real-world challenges and that showcase open data solutions for social good, and that create downstream applications as well. And we use broadly the open data series method from the ODI in the UK, which is a sort of sprint and challenge method that's often generated online. So we had 7 challenge areas that we developed as a consortium as a whole around and building on the types of data sets that we had available that were coming out of the observatories. And here these all are. We added the COVID-19 category to our data because, of course, some of our observatories had things like air quality data sets. And we thought this might be a relevant and interesting additional challenge area. And here you can see the kinds of data sets from across the 4 observatories or the 4 projects that we've got available here. The 2 winners actually managed to use the GROW Observatory soil moisture data, not always building on the actual concept of the data itself, but there was a lot of data to get at there. We had over 6,000 sensors in the ground and across a large geographic area. So it provided quite a rich data set for people to build on. And in order to evaluate the Open Data Challenge, we had a number of quite nice criteria with the technology readiness levels, with data sets that could be combined with other data that participants might bring with them, upholding fair principles, And we were really interested in those that could also provide the software artifact to GitHub. So we're really interested in also opening up the code for others to build on as well. So all in all, we had 44 teams and global, 11 full submissions, that is a walkthrough of that and code made available, etc. 2 awards and 1 highly commend at the end. And I think these are the challenge winners that you can see more about and access their source code and all of the relevant material and the project overview from the WeObserve marketplace, if you care to look there. Just moving quickly on and rounding up now to the insights and opportunities we think we can learn, and I'll start with the Open Data Challenge. It's really important, and I think realizable, to accelerate the uptake with a focus on increased openness, on not only on the kind of visualization and the type of ways in which people might interact with data in order to take action, but people increasingly want to understand and access the raw data, and especially from their own community. And also they want accessible code to build on things that others have built before them, so that they can bring that into their community activity as well. The quality of the innovation and proposals were really, really high, and we saw real value in a multi-stakeholder approach, so citizens and SMEs working together. And one thing I would say about the Open Data Challenge delivery and the operationalization of that is the intensity of the support required. We ran Slack mentorship. We had mentors actually supporting those teams all the way through. And when you're looking at 44 teams globally, that's quite a big and intense support required there. But the potential indicators for the services that came out, for those novel services, have some lessons for the sustainability of citizen observatories and potentially for business modeling as well. So just going on very quickly to the MOOC insights, there was still a huge interest in the provision of open source, accessible and collaborative tools, despite us knowing that there's so much out there, so much already available. The sustainability of the MOOC was really important. So the educational content and the best practices and insights and case studies and participant contributions has become a really important factor, and the community has been also established through the MOOC. So you need to build sustainability objectives into the project planning, and the facilitation and delivery competencies are also required in your team. But it's great to say that the sustainability of all of the work that we've done on the MOOC as a consortium is now available for an open run for a whole year on the 2021 FutureLearn platform. The reuse of all of the content, all the steps, videos, case studies are now almost available on the EU-Citizen.Science platform and the UCL Moodle, and a permanent record of all of the content and steps have been assigned a DOI, and that is licensed from the WeObserve consortium for anybody else to access. So apart from all of the scientific outputs that we've got, I just wanted to draw attention to the types of downloads and numbers of downloads of some of the tools. These are just some of the resources that we've had available, and these are some of the downloads of numbers of people that have accessed them. And then at the end, there's the DOI for all of the content to be reused in articles as well. So I just wanted to draw back attention back to you that you can access the FutureLearn MOOC now. It's available and it's an open run, and it will shortly be available on the EU Citizen-Science project as well, for you to do whatever you want to with and remix and build on and learn from. And I'd just like to say thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks so much, Mel, for providing an overview of much of the MOOC work and the Open Data Challenge work that we've done. Again, if you have any questions for Mel on this presentation, just pop them in the chat and we'll get back to that in the Q&A session. And now I'm handing over to Joan Maso for the last longer presentation on data interoperability and standardization and what WeObserve has done in that respect. Over to you, Joan.
Yes, thank you, Gerid. This is a presentation about data interoperability and standardization. I will do that presentation with Valantis that will present you the second part of this. First, let me say that citizen observatories are they the new silo? We have been there. I mean, the administrations, the cartographic agencies had their things in silos, but with the help of the public aim plus some directives and so on, we managed to open their data in data portals, at least here in Europe and the US and in other places. Citizen observatories and citizen science in general give priority to other important challenges. Well, there are some exceptions like the open street map and the global biodiversity information facility. But in general, there is kind of a lack of willing to share the data in a way that is interoperable. And we wanted to change that, and we wanted to change that by using experimentation. So there are several ways of doing experimentation collaboratively. And this is a graphic that presents, test beds, pilots, plugfests. But the two that I would like to focus today is the interoperability experiments and the hackathons. Interoperability experiments running for 6 months, more or less, trying to actually do tests on how to interoperate and share your observations, because there are many apps, there are many formats, there are many protocols out there, and we should do something about that in order to prevent those silos that I was talking about. And this is just one example where we took, if you start by the right-hand side, 2 different observatories. In this case was Natosfera and Hager, and we used a couple of adapters to actually demonstrate that if the data is formatted adequately, you could use 2 different technologies, the sensor observing system Miramon implementation and the one from 52 North, and combine them together in a single client. What I do mean by that? So this is what I mean. You could see both data sets combined in a single map. And this is the first step to actually start interoperating, to actually start merging data, to actually start sharing the data. We are pleased to see that the OGC took our initiative seriously and considers it one of these interoperability initiatives that they run with us. The citizen science interoperability experiment focused mainly on these 4 aspects. The sharing the data, I will talk a little bit more about that. The understanding the data, that's about vocabularies used for citizen science that could then facilitate that project metadata standards are useful for implementing catalogs and to be able to find citizen science projects and also in the end combine citizen science projects together. We started to explore the PPSR standard and the cost action evolution and the OGC naming authority and so on. Well, some experimentation was done about that. Connect the observatories in a single federation using the single sign-on system. And also we care about data quality, so we wanted to show how to document these critical metadata aspects that allows us to trust the data. Our data share, what we want to share the observations in a way that what was measured, when it was measured, what data was captured, where actually was done, how it was captured, who did that, and also, of course, which is the quality of the data. We tried a couple of models, the pure observations and measurements model from the OGC, following these recommendations, for citizen science that comes from the legacy of the COPWeb project. And so these brought us to experiment with sensor observing services. But now what seems to be more successful is using APIs. So we changed gears and we went for this sensor thing API for Citizen.Science. And sorry, because everybody that knows me knows that there will be a UML diagram in one of my slides, but I will not go into that detail. Let me, on the other hand, thank the initiators that saw value in the initiative, like the GRC, the European Space Agency, the Wilson Center, IIASA, and my institution, and of course the support from WeObserve, from NextGeos, from the OGC itself, and now recently from this other project that is called Cost for Cloud. We did 2 phases of it because, as I said, those are supposed to be 6 months, more or less, long initiatives. One conducted mainly in 2019, focused on the analysis of the sensor observing services that end up on our first engineering report that was approved by the Open Geospatial Consortium technical meeting. So now it's in the OGC portal as a public engineering report. And we had another phase, mainly in 2020, that was different, of course, because of the pandemic. We focused on the support of sensor thing APIs, and we are still elaborating the second engineering report that will be released soon. So this is about the interoperability experiment, but other things were done in WeObserve about experimentation, and that was the hackathon. And Valantis, it's up to you now.
Thanks a lot, Joan, for the introduction. So yeah, indeed, in the context of the interoperability in WeObserve, we also had we organized hackathon challenges on the bit of citizen science in the context of the Inspire hackathon. So there were 3 of them, with the main objective to improve interoperability between citizen observatories and other initiatives and support different activities as they were emerging from also from the interoperability community of practice. And we saw that we should further pursue them in this context. Now, hackathons are usually, we have them in mind as some quick sprints where participants gather together for 1 or 2 or 3 days, let's say, so as to hack an item and find a solution. In our case, and since the COVID-19 pandemic was upon us, we transformed this to online event that lasts for quite some time. As you can see, it was initiated from March, from the end of March and until May. So involving approximately 35 participants, at least our challenges, because there were many more in the other challenges of Inspire Hackathon, from 22 different countries, while also liaising with other hackathons in Africa that were taking place that time. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in the beginning of this process, there were webinars aiming to introduce participants to what were the challenges about. So, and establish the necessary background about how to work together with the participants. So there were, we had established a common workplace, channels, frequent channels of communication with the participants, so as to exchange views, to work together. We arranged short sprints and so on, in order to be able to pave the way about how we are working together and what it should be done by the teams involved in these activities. Next slide, please. Okay, and a bit sort of about what were these challenges about. So the first challenge, it was about authentication systems. So as Joan mentioned in the first part of the presentation, we know that there are different applications in the citizen science domain that are taking place, that are being implemented by different organizations, by different projects. But what can we do if we want, let's say, to integrate data from a protected environment that is being hosted by another project? So this was the scope of this challenge, number 6, that gave the opportunity to participants to be able to utilize and connect to their applications to either citizen science or to Earth observation data The goal here was to work with well-known protocols like OAuth or OpenID, Connect, in order to improve the accessibility of these resources. And in the context of this challenge, teams worked aiming to connect their front-end applications with one test infrastructure that we provided from the Science Citizen Observatory by applying an implicit grant type of authorization. Next slide, please. So the second challenge was focused on the connection of citizen observatories resources with the central catalog. So we know that there are different resources coming from different projects, but we need to find a way to be able to have a common access to all these resources in an aggregated way. And this challenge was aimed to address this fragmentation in the landscape of related activities and enable the integration of data coming from the different citizen observatories with an XGEOS catalog as an approach to connect citizen science into GEOS. Next slide, please. So there the participants and the teams work towards the analysis of different infrastructures and endpoints that will allow machine-to-machine access to resources. There was a documentation and analysis of data and resources involving community-based environmental monitoring projects. And finally, a data harvesting approach was implemented using test data from Science Citizen Observatory as a prototype that allows the ingestion of citizen science resources into a centralized catalog. In the context of these activities, the next GEOS catalog was utilized that already includes information about different observation data and other, let's say, products for environmental monitoring that it is already connected as part of the GEOS portal. Next slide, please. Yeah, and finally, the last challenge aims to improve interoperability between sharing in situ and citizen-sourced data. So here again, the goal is, and it stems from the activities of the interoperability community of practice, is to be able to use OGC standards and combine them with data from other, let's say, sources, not citizen science ones, let's say data coming from IT devices or from in situ monitoring sensor networks, and establish and combine use of these data and services among different platforms. Here, what we did is we worked and implemented an approach with the teams on data translators that essentially aim to facilitate the conversion of resources exposed from various data models to the OGC Sense of Things API. Okay, yeah, next slide, please. Yes. Okay, so here it is an example that we worked with another project called SenseLog that utilized another data model, and we showcase the different steps of the process, how we start from the mapping about the different data models, and then how we design and implement a connector between these two different data models. And next slide, I think also my final one. So all these activities and from different groups were presented to the final conference, to the Inspire conference, where a final online workshop took place, and the different results from the challenges were presented. And one of the citizen science challenges was awarded the second prize. And also, before closing this, it is really important to showcase the interest from the community and the members involved in this activity, since they, even beyond the end of the hackathon, they were interested in further interacting with the teams, exchanging views upon different aspects, and being able to further advance their work and what they did actually in the context of this hackathon. Thank you very much. And I think that with this we close, Joan.
Yep, back to you, Gerid.
Yeah, thanks, Valantis and Joan. Now I will continue to round up the webinar with some WeObserve outputs and key achievements. I think the presentations that we've shared with you today already give hopefully give a glimpse into what we've achieved, what we've done. They are a part of WeObserve. They are key parts of WeObserve, but obviously there have been many more activities, and it's rather impossible to talk about all of them. And I think you've also been able to see how diverse the activities were in terms of the topics that they addressed, but also in terms of the stakeholders that we were able to address with those. So really from the citizen scientists that are interested in citizen observatories and citizen science, trying out tools, open source tools in the MOOC, to experts in Earth observation or from UN agencies. So it's been a huge range, and part of the key achievements that we have reached is definitely improved coordination between the different environmental citizen observatories at very different levels, regional, European, and global levels, really. We have largely expanded the geographical coverage, which was one of our objectives, if you remember, and also improved the uptake of the knowledge base, and including data management preservation strategies, as Valantis and Joan have talked about. We've improved collaboration with SMEs through the data challenge, but also, and we haven't even touched upon that, through Copernicus pilot and the hackathons and other activities. And we've definitely achieved greater awareness, and also we've not mentioned those through roadshows where we brought together environmental disaster risk and emergency managers on discussing the benefits of citizen observatories for their work. And we've largely enhanced the process of integrating and uptaking citizen science and citizen observatories in GEOS and into the SDG framework, particularly. Now, key achievements in numbers, you've already heard a few numbers and seen a few numbers in the presentations, but just to recap some of those: 4 COPs with more than 500 signups across the COPs, roughly 70 active participations across the COP, 6 COP forums, and also, as Uta has mentioned, during just the regular COP meetings, we were able to engage non-COP members and COP members to really hold more than 40 individual presentations. So it was really getting people together, sharing their expertise, sharing their knowledge, exchanging ideas during the COP activities. We've also learned a lot about the MOOC today, and we have managed so far to engage more than 2,000 learners in the MOOC across more than 110 countries worldwide. As Mel mentioned, we've more than 750 downloads of these very specific open source tools and resources. And also we've heard that it's open for another full year in FutureLearn and soon available on the EU-Citizen.Science platform. And I think we're very proud about that. In terms of publications, we were very active. So we have 14 journal publications either already published or in the pipeline. And of those published, we have more than 30,000 article accesses and more than 100 citations already. This is largely credited to the publications around the interlinkages of citizen science and the SDG framework, which were very successful. In the field, we've more than 20 policy documents, conference papers, posters, other reports out. And if you just look at the WeObserve Zenodo, I think we've managed some great uptake of these resources already with more than 900 unique views, 600 downloads. So I think these are quite impressive numbers. And WeObserve has been present at, just in the second half of the project, at more than 60 events, conferences, and invited presentations, including the Euroscience Open Forum last year, the Americas Symposium, the UN World Data Forum, and this year the UN Science Policy Business Forum on the environment that actually took up some of the outputs of the SDGs COPs into the summary report of the forum. But we're not done. We are officially launching today 2 key outputs that draw together lessons learned, that draw together some of the great knowledge that we were able to gather across these 3 years. The first one being the WeObserve cookbook. I've already mentioned it, and this is open access and open now for you, and hopefully someone can share the link in the chat. A great repository for groups or individuals who are leading or will lead citizen observatory projects. It includes a lot of information on best practice examples, and it guides users through the resources. And those resources are tools, scientific papers, training materials, but also networks that they could take part in. And it includes key references and additional resources if you are interested to actually dive deeper into the topics. And around the topics, we have 30 pages within 4 overarching themes: getting to know and understand citizen observatories, creating and running citizen observatories, achieving impact with them, and ensuring sustainability of citizen observatories so that they can run longer term. So definitely a great resource to look at. So we invite you to come visit the WeObserve website, take a look at the cookbook, and share it, use it, share it with people that you think would be interested in it. And the second key output that we're launching today is the WeObserve roadmap for the uptake of the Citizen Observatory's knowledge base. It's a slightly different approach to the knowledge that we've gathered. So the roadmap outlines the dynamic landscape of citizen observatories, and it provides actionable pathways for research and innovation in the future to further advance the capabilities and impacts of citizen observatories in the future. So it is directed at practitioners on the one hand, so research institutions, civil society organizations, public authorities, and others, for directing research and innovation plans for future citizen observatories, and also for conceptualizing future citizen observatories. It's also a document for the European Commission to support them in shaping Horizon Europe funding calls under the European Green Deal agenda. And also we consider national funding agencies a target group so that they can learn more about citizen observatories and identify suitable scenarios, hopefully to also fund citizen observatories nationally. The roadmap itself, or the roadmap document, provides an overview of the citizen observatory landscape, so the history of it, the current landscape, but also provides sort of a future vision. And then the core of it is really the research and innovation roadmap itself, which consists of 4 main areas, 11 pathways, and many more actions for the short term, which we consider for the next 3 years, and the medium term until the end of the Horizon Europe timeline. So the new funding, program, research and innovation program of the European Commission. And we conclude with recommendations to future funders of the citizen observatories. And in the picture here, you can see these 4 main areas that we outline, and the 11 pathways that go with them. Now, this roadmap is available on the WeObserve Zenodo community. And again, I think someone will probably put a link in the chat on that. So again, please go there, look at the document, and yeah, let us know what you think. Be in touch. just as a very final rounding up, still up and running. We've heard this, the WeObserve MOOC is still out for a year, and also signing up for the communities of practice, even though we are at the end of the funding period officially of WeObserve, are continuing. Get in touch on weobserve.eu, through WeObserve Synodo. This is where you can find our outputs, our resources, the contacts. And yeah, with that, I would like to close the webinar and let's get into Q&As. Thank you very much. All right. Margaret, do you want to take over?
I do, thank you. I'm just seeing that my background was not the intended background.
It's very
so thank you everybody for joining us today, and in sharing all these links with you. It's that moment of pleasure at the end of a project when you realize just how much you've produced, just how much you've learned, and just how much work it's done. So it's been also a pleasure for us in the team to hear from our colleagues on all that's been accomplished. And there's been a few questions in the chat as well. So I'm going to start with some questions for Uta about the launching of communities of practice. But anybody else that has questions for any of the work of WeObserve or any of our speakers today, please don't hesitate to put those in the chat, or in a moment put your hand up and I'll invite you to ask your question directly. So Uta, Deborah had a few questions for you about setting up communities of practice. And the first one was about reaching out to participants. So first of all, how do you know who to reach out to when setting up a COP, and where do you start with finding the interested parties? And if it's mainly academic that you're able to reach, how do you have some ideas about how you can include others more, so you have more of a balance, representative balance in that?
Sure, and I will also invite Dilek and Joan to come in here as the chairs of the other COPs. I chair the co-design and the impact COPs. It's a sort of a bit of a chicken and egg situation, of course. You know, you want to run your COPs, who do you invite? We piggybacked on the fact that the citizen science community at large is fairly well networked, and we have the regional citizen science organizations, associations. We had the benefit of the time at which we wanted to launch the COPs, that the ECSA conference was happening, still face-to-face at the time. So we organized the launch back to back with that, and so we could serve on the back of the wave of the big citizen science community, of course, that the ECSA conference was bringing together. And then subsequently, again, when the SDG COP was launched, half a year later, piggybacked on the back of another conference, Citizen Observatories for Water Management in Venice. So we were trying to provide the additional value of functioning under the large umbrella organizations, but offering a smaller, tighter environment in which practitioners could communicate. As far as the diversity of the participants is concerned, yeah, again, that's a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, academics are very interested in writing papers. This is how we know what we know to do. We know how to do that, and we know that that's a good way of codifying what we know. So we naturally tend towards that, and that creates perhaps an environment that is less conducive, certainly for SMEs. We've tried to reach out to SMEs, example, inviting them as guest speakers, so they can still dip into the COPs, but don't quite have the commitment. We try to find arrangements that we can still draw on their experience, because we also see that there's an increasing number of SMEs involved and have a role in citizen observatories to play, and therefore should be part of the discussion in the COPs. I'll stop here for additions, certainly from Dilek and her particular SDG COP.
Thank you, Uta, and thanks for the question. That's actually quite nice one, and I will just make this addition to what Uta said. Maybe also the important events. So we have submitted abstract for big conferences and events in our particular fields. If you consider the SDG scope, we also used our own personal networks with the UN agencies and national statistical offices, and we followed up on key activities such as at the start of our activities, there was the Interagency Expert Group on SDG Indicators meeting, that is whose secretariat is the UN Statistics Division, and they are responsible for developing the global SDG indicator framework and including metadata standards for them and conceptual and methodological development of all the SDG indicators. So this is a group of national statistical offices, and when we went there, we of course had the opportunity to network with all these national statistical offices and invite them to join SDG scope activities. So such events, such conferences like UN World Data Forum or UN Conference on Big Data and Statistics were the key activities that were reached out to global data and statistics communities, and not only staying within the citizen science community. Thank you.
Thanks, Dilek. Juan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, in our case, we were fortunate because we were able to combine different initiatives that were out there. I mean, we had the GeoCit community activity. We have the OGC Citizen-Science domain working group. We have the ECSA Interoperability working group. We simultaneously had this Earth Challenge 2020 in the US and globally. So all these things together brought a nice community where we were able to discuss that, how to make better use of citizen science data and share it and all this stuff.
Thank you. Yes, there were some more questions about the communities of practice as well from Deborah. Uta, during your talk, you were talking about some of the operational aspects, monthly gatherings, and the networking moments. And the question is whether some of that interest in networking is amongst the participants, and the value back to them of the networking is partially because they struggle to find each other. Is this one of the value adds of a community of practice, to help people also find each other?
Yeah, and I think it's more than finding each other. I think it's creating a space for that deeper conversation, because we find each other at ECSA conferences. We find each other, in email lists. As I said, in principle, we're fairly well networked, but unless there's a time slot, unless there's a forum, unless there are workshops set up, none of us can really make the space for that deeper conversation. I think that's what the COP mechanism provides, the stronger relationships, the closer updates about all these other projects that are happening that have relevant methods and approaches, and the cross-fertilization really at a deeper level, at project level, is what we were able to facilitate.
Can the three COPs leaders also say a little bit more about how you went about setting the agenda, the topic agendas, the meeting agendas within each of your COPs?
I think I can start with that. So each meeting was actually giving us a little bit ideas and opinion about what we need to have as the next in the next meeting to be discussed, issues around what we have. So as Uta highlighted, also initially we had an action plan agreed on with the community of practice participants. So based on this outline and the action plan that we had and the objectives that we set for ourselves, we realized that it was actually quite clear in each and every meeting what kind of topic we need to cover and who are the experts that could talk in these particular topics. So these were and of course, like the developing landscape within in terms of the SDG scope, it has actually led us quite easily what topics we need to cover, who would be interested, or what the co-participants would be interested in. And this was actually, the rest was the interactions between the members.
Juan, would you like to add to that as well?
Yeah, well, from the Interop COP, the interoperability experiments give us a framework. So each time, we have done this twice, each time that we started an interoperability experiment, we designed some objectives, what we wanted to actually test, and this deeply depends on the community and the tools that they have available to play with, if I may. well, we did that planning at the beginning. We exercise it during these 6 months. Then we do the engineering report. Then we go back to planning again. And these are the 2 cycles that we did.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. I invite everybody again to please add some questions in the chat if you'd like to ask any of our speakers about the work that WeObserve, or any of us in the team who are also present in today's webinar, or raise your hand. To add a question of my own on this topic of networking and networking events, our project, like many of the projects that are currently live, straddled this period of before COVID and during COVID. And of course, this forced us to go online. We have the benefit of having already had a lot of in-person contact in establishing this sense of community within the COPs before we then had to go online. But many are now in the situation of building up communities completely online, being in a much more virtual situation. And Uta, you touched a little bit in your presentation on the importance of having funding support to maintaining that ongoing momentum. But of course, part of what we had within the budget of the project was also financial support to get together, to physically come together. Could you speak to this face-to-face element versus virtual element, and some of the things that have been learned about straddling it?
Sure. I think, yes, certainly the face-to-face element is very important, and we all look forward to meeting again and having a nice drink together after work, I'm sure. At the same time, yes, many of the COPs members had met face-to-face, but we also still recruited. We continue to have new signups to the COPs, people, you know, that during the last year, for every single additional forum that we've held, people keep signing up, keep joining us, and find ways to sort of integrate themselves in the COPs as they go along, and the COPs are integrating them in their stride, if you like. We see now a world in which we can work around the fact that we don't have these face-to-face opportunities. I mentioned the sister COP, the Citizen-Science and Open Science COP that we launched under the Citizen-Science Global Partnership umbrella. And that was launched entirely online. And what we did was to split it up. We held the co-design workshops twice in 2 different time zones on the same day to accommodate people's preferences around the world. And then we combined the insights that we got from both workshops. And in the COPs forums as large, I think what we've found is we give more room for the sort of online icebreaker sessions, for cross-fertilization across all the COPs to make sure that people are still able to mingle and chat and explore things that are not strictly on the agenda and not, you know, 100% targeted just on the subject matter.
I would add to what Uta just said. I think in part the WeObserve project actually benefited from this move online. I think at times we were able to gather more participants and more interested people in the different activities that we had, as if we would have held these events and activities solely face-to-face. So I think that obviously there's a lot of cons to the situation, but I think we've made a very smart move in the direction of using online technologies much more innovatively and much more much more broadly, also to achieve good outputs and impact.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you, Dilek. We have another, sorry, Gerid. We have another question for Dilek, which is why your name was on the tip of my tongue, Dilek, with regards to the work that was done within your community of practice about the connection between citizen science and the UN, and a research fellow at the UN Research and Training Institute is asking about how she can go about learning more about the SDGs COP and the connections with UN, and how she can get started with that.
I'm happy to, so I will put my email address in the chat, so please feel free to write to me and we can have a chat about it. But and also all the outputs that we produced are available on the WeObserve SDGs Scope website that I can also put the link in. But I think in terms of these practical questions and how you could move forward, it's better to have a conversation about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dilek. Also a question about how to find out about various citizen observatory groups and initiatives that might be happening in your own local community, your own local environment. How do you get started with finding them? Do you just start with a good old Google search, or are there other ways to find local initiatives?
You access the cookbook, the cookbook that we just launched today, which provides that sort of one-stop shop for total newcomers to this field. Where indeed we have some introductory part to give people background what citizen observatories are, which ones exist already and how you can find them and how they are distinct from, let's say, more mainstream citizen science initiatives. And in fact, Margaret, I think you're very well placed to answer part of that question yourself, given that you led, the massive piece of work on the landscape of citizen observatories in Europe. So back to you.
Yes, as soon as I have a moment, I'll grab a link to the WeObserve website, where we've been, in fact, inviting people to tell us about their citizen observatory initiatives and literally put them on the map. And of course, there's also the EU-Citizen.Science platform for finding a whole range of citizen science projects, some of which would fall into the category of citizen observatories, and some are different aspects of citizen science initiatives, but that's a great place to start as well. So I'll stick a link there in there at a moment. From Claire, we've got a really good question about evaluation, impact evaluation specifically, because citizen observatories have as one of their characteristics that they're much more longitudinal. Can you say something about any of our colleagues joining us today? Can you say something about the impact of the community of practice or the MOOC when their impact is actually going to play out over a longer period of time?
I'll start with the COPs. I'm sure Mel's going to want to chip in if she's still around, or her colleagues on the MOOC evaluation. As I mentioned, the COPs, we took stock of where we stand and to what extent we've met people's expectation. So we have this current measure of impact. We also have their initial sign up, where we also ask them about their expectations, so we can already compare. And as the COPs continue, of course, we can revisit this exercise, and we can take stock again and see how impact actually unfolds over time. So to that extent, we're doing, let's say, the best practice in terms of impact assessment that we're also gathering as far as methods are concerned in the impact COP.
Thanks, Uta. I'm still here. And just onto the MOOCs, I think, I suppose particularly the FutureLearn platform, where we work with, has a back-end dashboard that enables us to both live monitor the types of discussions that are going on and come in and be a part of those discussions as the MOOC's progressing. It's a great platform, or if you're looking for another type of platform to enable that peer-to-peer learning as well. But it enables us right at the start to establish why people are joining the MOOC, what experience have they already got, what would they like to learn, what's drawn them in, and from what background they come. At the end of a MOOC, having an evaluation, so each of the participants that finish the MOOC complete an evaluation, and they assess the quality of the materials and also how they're going to apply that. And we had a strategy to iterate those MOOCs. So to learn from the feedback that was coming through the participants in the first run, and to change and adapt and to refine and to improve the resources into the second run. And you can see the feedback from the second run, some of which is actually visible on the FutureLearn platform, gave it 100%. I mean, people have had a fantastic time using those resources and have gone away and actually made little experiments and come back and reported them in course to others. So building that evaluation into any materials that you might create, or indeed into your observatory, where participants might evaluate tools that they've used, or interfaces, or even the governance and communication of an observatory itself as it's going, will enable you to iterate and feedback and actually improve that as you go on. So those are my sort of comments on how specifically the MOOC has handled evaluation, and how you can also build it into any project that you're engaged with.
Thank you, Mel. That's really interesting. We've had some Juan, you've been sharing some information about PPSR core in the chat, and that might be actually interesting to bring into the discussion here, because the work we've been doing in WeObserve within the interoperability comp and the interoperability experiment has touch points with other work that's happening elsewhere. We have the work on the metadata schema for citizen science projects and data, which is PPSR core, but also some of the members of the Cost for Cloud team are in the audience with us today. And there's touch points with the work that's happening in other projects such as Cost for Cloud, which are also about interoperability. Could you perhaps tell a little bit more about both of those initiatives?
Yeah. Talking about the PPSR, this is the public participation in scientific research standard. The initial aim is to actually describe those initiatives. So it's what we call a metadata standard, in the sense that you can describe projects and you can build a catalog of projects when you know how to describe them. And CS Starter is one of the platforms that is making use of it. So it's a reference implementation of that. So this is one of the interoperability problems that we have, how to discover citizen science projects. The next problem that we have is how to make use of the data, how to access the data of the citizen science, and even more, how to mix that data with what we could call official sources, in double quotes. And this is what we have been focusing on when I talk about sensor observing system, when I talk about sensor thing APIs, these kind of schemas to do that. You asked me about Cost for Cloud. Cost for Cloud is again another project where 11 services related with citizen science and 9 citizen observatories are going together into the European Open Science Cloud. This is a scientific research infrastructure. So we have to keep let's call it the professionality of the rest of scientists, and we need to use partially their standards and their strategies. And this way we will be in the European Open Science Cloud portal that maintains a catalog of services. And this is the objective, to demonstrate that is not only possible, but relatively easy if you know how to do it.
Thank you, Juan. So I see that we're slowly nearing our promised end date to wrap up our conversation and webinar today. Are there any final questions from the audience that you would like to ask any of our speakers, or more generally about WeObserve? And I will otherwise hand back over to you, Gerid.
Okay, thanks, Margaret, for the moderation of the Q&A. Thanks everyone for your questions. The WeObserve team, a very big thank you to all of the team members of WeObserve. I think it's very sad that the project closes, but I think we have a lot to celebrate and a lot to disseminate, to give out to the community, a lot of knowledge brought together. And I think that is one of the big insights of the project, that these coordination and support actions are actually really needed to gather and consolidate knowledge across the research and innovation actions, just to be able to move forward and to advance knowledge and expertise in the field. So thank you everyone again. Have a great rest of the afternoon. And I don't know if Tim, you want to come back in, otherwise I would close the webinar. Thank you to all of the participants for sticking with us, and yeah, thank you and goodbye.
Bye.